Okay, so this video is going to explain how the flames in stage 6 and the claws in stage 7 work. So let's go and jump into it. And for the sake of this video, I'm actually going to be invincible, just because I'm cool like that, and it makes it easier to explain stuff. So there's two patterns that the claws and the flames use. One pattern is a proximity pattern, and I call it that because it triggers based on how close it is to you. So these flames, this flame up here won't retract because I'm not very close to it, but as I approach it, it will retract. Now if you watch, so I've got a memory watch here, watch 0544, that memory address. As the flame retracts, what will happen is that it's going to set a counter on that address, and that's the amount of time it has before the flame goes through the process of retracting again. Now it's actually going to be a few additional, you have a few more frames to play around with, but that's the timer the game uses to know when it's going to trigger the flame again. So it counts down. You can see that behavior. And then same thing with this other flame here. So we've got, so this flame is operating at 0546 memory address. And you can see it retract again. And so on and so forth. Now the next address I want to call your attention to, this one's really important, it's at 001A. This is the global timer. And what that is that is an address, and it's always counting from 0 up to 255. And when it reaches 255, it will start over again. You watch it there. So it hits 255, goes up to 0. The game times certain events, like when certain flames retract, when certain claws retract, based on the value of this global timer. And this global timer is actually always running no matter what you do. So it's running when you reset the game, before you even start playing. And this value is also running at the title screen, even if you pause it. So where that relates to us is that the flames you see here are actually on a global timer. And so they come out twice each revolution the global timer makes from 0 to 255. So within that cycle, you'll see the flames retract, or the claws come down twice. And so what you can do is if you're watching this timer, you can kind of see how they'll behave. So right now, let's let it run through for a bit. So I happen to know the bottom flame that we see on the screen here, this one will start to come out when the global timer reaches 0. So it'll hit 0, and then two frames later, you'll see the sprite for the flame come out. So it'll come out there. And 32 frames from when the bottom flame is triggered, the flame just above it will be triggered. So if we look on, so we look for the next flame, so next frame, so it's on frame 32. The flame just above it is triggered. And so if we skip 2 more frames, you'll see the sprite for it come out. And third flame, 32 frames later. So that would be 64. So if we go to 64, 2 frames later, you'll see it come out. And the logic for the flames retracting is based on whether or not they're loaded. So as long as they're loaded and the global timer is set, they'll retract. So that was loaded, the global timer hit 128 as the flame was loaded on the screen. So if I sit around, it won't come out immediately. So the way it works is if the if you're close enough for the game to actually load the flames, as long as the global timer hits a certain address, the flame will come out. So the address for the global timer, so this one comes out, the bottom one I said comes out at 0. It'll also come out at frame 128. So two frames later, and then when we hit 0, it'll start to come out too. You can kind of play around with it if you're lucky. So if I wait 2 frames and then go right, I wasn't far enough for the game to load the bottom flame, and so I just barely missed the global timer trigger for it, so I was actually able to go past all of these. You can't really manipulate this at real time because you won't really know what the global timer is when you get to, you know, this part in stage 6. I mean, I suppose if you had like a perfect frame counter you could, but for the most part you don't really know what the global timer is when you reach a certain point in the game. But you know that if the flame triggers, it has to have a certain value, and so you can, you know, plan your strategy accordingly. So in the document that I'll be linking, so you've got this flame at the top here is done by proximity trigger, so you can see the counter for that go down. As far as the flame at the bottom, the one that's actually close to the barrier, so that one also happens to be 128 and 0 for the times that it loads. So if we watch, global timer will get to 128, and then 2 frames later you see the sprite come out. And so you can look up, so all of these flames are on the global timer. This one up top here, these flames are different than the other ones. So as they retract, they actually get a random value about that'll be how many frames they go until they retract. So right now it's running, this flame here is going through 0545, and so the value it gets, value this time was 0, so it came like right out immediately. Now the countdown is going from 8, so it's gonna trigger there. So now it's going to count down. It'll come out immediately. Sometimes the number at 0545 is large enough that it'll have a few moments before it comes out again. So this time there was a few moments. Yeah, this one's proximity, but all the other ones, there's a random value as to how long it takes until they come out. It's usually pretty small. Sometimes it can go as high as 50 frames though. This one is just 0 period, it's just always coming out. And those are the values for stage 6. Stage 7, pretty much all the values are going to be based on that global timer. The values until those claws come down. So, for instance, over here, I happen to know that the first claw and the 5th claw on the bottom section are going to come out at 128, and that also applies to the first claw on the top row. So at 128, you'll see 3 claws come down. So left and right in the bottom row, first one on the top row. So 2 frames later, you'll see that. So if you know the timer, you can see how all of these come down in relation to the global timer. So not much more to explain there. Just if you know the global timer address, I mean, you can plan accordingly. The one that people are probably the most interested in, though, and I'll just finish up the video with this, is there's one particular claw that's toward the end that's notorious for killing people. And that's in the bottom row here. I mean, obviously in a speedrun you'd want to avoid going down here, but if you're curious, this claw here, so this one's like always coming down, and then it's really sneaky when it comes back. And the actual issue with that one is, so this one is actually on the global timer. These ones here are actually based on proximity. The first two trigger when you're close to them and you have 64 frames until you can safely move past them. These only give you 32 frames. So all the first four are done on the global timer, and then to just mess with your head, the last one, I'd back up a second. These first four are done based on your proximity, so it retracts and then you walk past it. And then to mess with your head, so we go from proximity, and then this one is on the global timer. And so it's never actually safe to go through this, to walk past this one, until you're close to it, so it'll trigger the loading pattern. And the global timer for you to get by safely needs to be between 208 and 255. So between 208 and 255, it's safe to walk past it. And then once you hit 0, it'll start coming down again. And it will keep coming down pretty much continuously until the global timer hits 208. So it's a really effective way of messing with you. And yeah, there's not too much else to say about the last group here. To make it a little bit interesting, this final set here, so we've got 6, and the timing of 3 of the claws and the alternate are synchronized. So the timing of the first group is on frames 32 of the global timer and 160. So we reach 160, and then 2 frames later, 3 of them, the odd number ones will come out, and then 32 frames later that will come out, and you have just enough time to walk past those and not get hit. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll be attaching the document that gives the timers for all of these, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions.